Marcus Jefferson, a 16-year-old teen, was suddenly accused of shoplifting and cornered by an aggressive mall security guard, an act that left him humiliated in front of everyone. Tom Reynolds, known for his short temper and unfair biases, refused to listen to Marcus's protests, letting prejudice dictate his actions. But just as the situation seemed hopeless, Marcus's father, Police Chief Richard Jefferson, arrived and turned the tide with his calm yet commanding presence. And just wait to see how the confrontation unfolded, restoring dignity and proving that justice can prevail even in the face of blatant unfairness. It was a sweltering Saturday afternoon at Maplewood Mall, the kind of day where the heat clings to your skin and even the air seems heavy. Families wandered lazily between stores, children tugged at their parents' hands, and the soft hum of conversation mixed with the distant melody of a fountain in the center courtyard. Among the crowd, Marcus Jefferson moved with ease, his sneakers squeaking slightly against the polished tile floor. 16, with an easy smile and bright eyes, he walked with his two closest friends, Aaron and Jamal, joking about a new video game that had just hit the shelves. Their laughter bounced off the walls, drawing a few smiles from nearby shoppers. Marcus felt light, untethered, as if nothing in the world could touch him on that bright, ordinary day. He had just passed the food court when a sharp voice cut through the warmth and the chatter like a blade. "Hey! Stop right there!" Marcus spun around, startled. His eyes met those of Tom Reynolds, the mall's security guard. Tom had been working at Maplewood for over a decade, and everyone in the staff knew him as a man with a short fuse, especially around teens like Marcus. There were whispers about his biases, rumors that sometimes colored his decisions in ways that were unfair. Marcus had never been personally affected, until now. Without any warning, Tom stepped closer, his bulk filling the space between them, and pressed Marcus against the cool wall of the corridor. The sudden force sent a jolt through Marcus's body, his back pressed tight against the hard surface. He tried to step back, to explain himself, but Tom's expression was carved from stone, eyes narrowed with suspicion. "I saw you taking something," Tom said, voice low but sharp, every syllable heavy with accusation. "Don't even try to lie." Marcus's heart raced. "I didn't take anything. You've got the wrong person." His voice cracked slightly, a mix of fear and disbelief. He looked around desperately, hoping someone would intervene, but the shoppers nearby were frozen, their phones raised to record, but no one stepping forward. A mother tried to hush her child, a couple muttered to each other, and a young man in a hoodie slowed his pace, unsure whether to intervene. In that moment, Marcus realized the full weight of the situation. It wasn't just unfair, it was personal, targeted, humiliating. Tom's grip didn't loosen. Instead, he leaned in, his face twisting with a mixture of anger and certainty that only hardened the accusation. Every protest Marcus made seemed to fall into a void. The crowd grew slightly, curiosity and unease spreading like wildfire. Marcus's friends, Aaron and Jamal, tried to interject, voices sharp with worry. "Hey, stop! You don't know what you're talking about!" But their words barely reached Tom, who seemed almost blind to anyone but Marcus. The humiliation stung as much as the sudden shove. Marcus felt it in his chest, a tight, burning knot of frustration and injustice. People were watching, yet no one was stopping this. His pride and dignity, cultivated over 16 years of learning to navigate the world with respect and caution, felt stripped away in seconds. His voice, usually confident, wavered as he shouted for someone to recognize the truth, for fairness, for acknowledgement that he was being judged without cause. And then the anger bubbled, not just his, but the collective tension of everyone sensing the unfairness. It was sharp, raw, and immediate. Marcus's mind raced. Why him? Why now? How could someone treat him like this in broad daylight, in front of dozens of strangers? The injustice was heavy, palpable, and impossible to ignore. He felt a surge of indignation, the first spark in a fire that would demand resolution. Even as Tom continued his accusations, oblivious to the ripples of outrage around him, Marcus clenched his fists at his sides, not out of the desire to retaliate physically, but as a reflexive shield against the violation of his dignity. He was determined not to let this define him, not to let someone else's prejudice control the narrative of his life. In that corridor, against the polished walls of Maplewood Mall, the first seeds of resistance and of hope were quietly, fiercely planted. Marcus's friends froze in place, their mouths open, eyes wide with disbelief. Aaron gripped Jamal's arm, whispering urgent questions under his breath, but neither of them could think of a way to stop what was happening. "I didn't do anything!" Marcus shouted again, his voice sharper this time, trembling with a mix of fear and frustration. But Tom Reynolds only tightened his grip, his bulky hands unyielding, steering Marcus through the crowded corridor toward the security office at the far end of the mall. Shoppers parted instinctively as they realized something serious was happening, their curiosity mingled with unease. Phones appeared in hands, the faint glow of recording screens reflecting back the tension in the air. Whispers spread through the crowd, fragments of shocked commentary. "What's he doing? Why is he taking him?" Each question seemed to emphasize Marcus's helplessness, turning him into the center of a scene he hadn't asked for. The murmurs were like echoes of judgment, reinforcing the sense that everyone around him was watching, but unable or unwilling to intervene. Marcus's chest tightened with a heavy, burning sensation. It wasn't just the fear of being held against his will. It was the humiliation, the knowledge that he was being accused because of the color of his skin rather than any evidence or fact. Each step toward the security office felt like a step deeper into a shadowed space where fairness and reason had no foothold. His friends' voices, sharp and pleading, faded behind the pressing bulk of Tom's body, and the corridor seemed to shrink around him, walls closing in, turning the mall's bright open space into a cage of injustice. Tears pricked at the corners of Marcus's eyes, stinging with the salt of frustration and disbelief. He had never felt so powerless in his life. Every argument, every explanation he could muster was swallowed by Tom's certainty, replaced with baseless accusations and the weight of authority. Marcus's mind raced, struggling to process how quickly a normal afternoon had turned into a moment of public shaming. It wasn't fair. It couldn't be. And yet, there it was, an overwhelming, tangible unfairness pressing down on him from all sides. As they neared the security office, Marcus noticed the faces of bystanders, some sympathetic, some uncertain, some recording in silence. He realized with a pang that their presence, though numerous, couldn't protect him. The collective gaze of the mall's crowd felt both intimate and alienating at once. He had never felt so alone, so exposed. The injustice wasn't abstract anymore. It was physical, immediate, and impossible to ignore. Each step forward was a reminder that his dignity was being stripped away in broad daylight, that the world could be harsh and unforgiving in ways that no one could predict. A dull ache settled in his chest, a mix of fear, shame, and growing frustration. Marcus clenched his fists at his sides, not to strike, but to hold on to something solid amid the storm of helplessness. He fought to steady his breathing, counting each step as though it might somehow anchor him to reality. But the sense of helplessness weighed on him, making each moment stretch painfully into the next. He felt small, vulnerable, and trapped, a spectator in his own life as he was led further from freedom and dignity. And yet, beneath the fear and humiliation, a spark remained. Marcus's mind, despite the pain, refused to fully surrender. Somewhere under the weight of injustice, a quiet determination began to grow, fragile but undeniable. He would not allow this moment to define him, even if he didn't yet know how he could resist. The corridor seemed endless, the walls of the mall pressing closer, but that tiny ember of inner strength remained, a silent promise that he would endure, that something, someone, might still turn the tide. As Tom pushed open the door to the security office, Marcus's heart sank further, yet that ember of resilience glimmered in his chest. The injustice had won the first battle, but Marcus, even in his fear and pain, had not yet lost the war. The real test, what he could withstand and what would come next, was waiting just beyond that threshold. Just as Tom Reynolds pushed Marcus toward the small, windowless security office at the back of Maplewood Mall, the sudden swish of sliding glass doors echoed through the corridor. The murmur of the crowd shifted, an instinctive pause as everyone turned toward the source of the interruption. Marcus's heart, already pounding, skipped a beat as a tall figure strode purposefully toward them, shoulders squared and eyes locked with an intensity that immediately demanded attention. It was Police Chief Richard Jefferson, Marcus's father. He had arrived in response to a call about a disturbance, the urgency in his tone carrying weight even over the cell phone. Now, seeing his son trapped by the aggressive guard, his initial shock quickly gave way to a calm, commanding presence. Richard's eyes widened briefly, registering the scene, the tension, the unfairness of it all. Then he exhaled slowly, his breathing controlled, his stance firm. There was no panic, only focus. The air seemed to change the instant he stepped into the corridor, the heavy weight of injustice that had pressed down on Marcus, lifting just enough to let a flicker of hope in. Tom Reynolds, who had been so sure of his authority, froze. He felt the shift in energy immediately, though he couldn't yet fully grasp why. His confidence faltered as he looked up and finally realized the identity of the man standing before him. The recognition hit like a sudden chill. Marcus's father was the chief of police. The guard's usual bluster evaporated in an instant, replaced by a hesitant, uneasy posture. He could see, in the stern, unyielding gaze of Richard Jefferson, that this was a man who commanded respect, who had spent decades ensuring order, fairness, and justice in the city. "Step away from my son," Chief Jefferson said, his voice steady but heavy with authority, laced with an undeniable power that reverberated through the corridor. Every word was deliberate, unshakable, and final. Marcus felt the tension around him shift like an invisible tide. The fear and humiliation that had weighed so heavily moments ago now seemed to thin, replaced by a sense of protection that he had not felt in hours. The unfairness, the weight of being accused without cause, didn't vanish entirely, but it now had a counterforce, someone who could confront it, someone who could undo it. For Marcus, the sight of his father brought more than relief. It ignited a spark of hope deep in his chest. Justice, which had seemed absent, was no longer an abstract concept. It had form and presence, walking steadily through the sliding doors toward him. He could feel it in the way the crowd shifted slightly, the murmurs hushed, as people instinctively recognized the authority and seriousness of the moment. His own pulse, once frantic with fear, began to steady. For the first time since the incident began, Marcus sensed that the situation might yet be righted. Aaron and Jamal's anxious expressions eased as they watched the scene unfold, seeing the hope mirrored in Marcus's eyes. The collective energy of bystanders seemed to acknowledge the change. A moment that had felt hopeless now had a pivot point. Marcus, still pressed lightly against the office wall, drew in a slow breath. He felt a quiet strength pooling inside him, a subtle shift from helplessness to possibility. The ember that had lingered even during the worst moments of humiliation now burned a little brighter. Tom Reynolds hesitated, his earlier certainty dissolving into uneasy compliance. He could no longer lean on intimidation or authority. The balance had shifted. Chief Jefferson's calm but firm presence was undeniable, a living barrier against unfairness. Marcus felt it too, an unspoken promise that he would not face this alone, that someone with power and integrity was here to defend him. In that charged moment, Marcus realized that fear could give way to hope, that injustice could meet resistance, and that courage and authority could arrive when it was most needed. The weight of the world seemed just slightly lighter, and Marcus felt a deep, surging confidence that no matter what happened next, he would not be left powerless. Justice wasn't gone. It had arrived, and with it came hope. Tom Reynolds stammered, his words tumbling out in a nervous jumble as he tried to justify his actions. I just thought, he began, but his voice faltered under the calm, unwavering gaze of Chief Richard Jefferson. There was no room for excuses, no space for prejudice to linger in the presence of authority rooted in justice. Every syllable from Tom seemed weaker than the one before, his confidence completely undone. The crowd, who had been watching in tense silence, leaned in slightly, sensing that the moment they had been holding their breath for was arriving. The atmosphere shifted, the air was charged with relief, anticipation, and the quiet power of fairness being restored. Chief Jefferson didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Each word he spoke carried weight. "You will release him immediately," he said, steady and firm. "And you will answer for this." The simple clarity of the command left no room for negotiation. Tom's shoulders slumped, and he reluctantly stepped back, finally allowing Marcus to free himself from the cornered position that had seemed so suffocating moments before. Marcus blinked, the tension leaving his muscles in slow waves. For the first time in what felt like hours, he could breathe freely. The humiliation that had clung to him like a shadow began to lift, replaced by a cautious sense of relief and, slowly, pride. He stepped forward, adjusting his backpack and brushing at his sleeves, aware that the bystanders' eyes were still on him. But this time, the looks were different, no longer of judgment or curiosity, but of recognition and quiet respect. His friends, Aaron and Jamal, came up alongside him, offering supportive pats on the shoulder. The three of them exchanged glances that said more than words ever could. They had witnessed a moment of injustice, confronted and overturned. Chief Jefferson guided Marcus toward the office exit, his hand lightly on his son's shoulder, a gesture of reassurance and protection. Witnesses watched as the two emerged into the main corridor, a symbol of authority paired with integrity. Cameras still recorded, but now the story being captured was different, a story of resolution, of fairness restored, of a young man being defended against baseless accusations. The crowd, initially tense and uncertain, began to murmur among themselves with approval. Some nodded, others whispered quietly to friends, and many were visibly moved by the turn of events. Later that day, Tom Reynolds was suspended pending a formal review. The mall issued a public statement acknowledging the incident, affirming that discrimination or unfounded accusations of any kind would not be tolerated. For Marcus, the knowledge that the system, when guided by principle, could respond correctly provided a deep sense of validation. He felt shaken by the ordeal, but also proud, not of the confrontation itself, but of having survived it, of having witnessed truth and justice prevail in real time. Marcus's thoughts turned inward as he reflected on what had just happened. The incident had been terrifying, unfair, and deeply personal, yet standing beside truth and authority had transformed his despair into something powerful. Courage, he realized, did not always mean physical bravery. It could be found in seeking the support of fairness, in trusting those who embody integrity, and in maintaining one's dignity in the face of prejudice. It was a lesson that would stay with him far longer than the fear of the moment. The story of that afternoon left a lasting impression, not only on Marcus, but on everyone who had witnessed it. Shoppers, bystanders, and even employees of the mall would carry the memory of seeing injustice confronted directly, of seeing a young man's dignity restored in front of a crowd. It reminded them that courage and integrity could triumph over prejudice, that one stand for what is right could inspire change, and that fairness, when upheld, had the power to shift not just a single moment, but the perspective of an entire community. Marcus walked away from the mall that day feeling lighter, his steps steady and purposeful. He had faced humiliation, fear, and injustice, but now he also carried hope, resilience, and a quiet confidence that fairness could prevail. In his heart, he knew that courage was contagious, and that even in the darkest moments, standing up for truth could illuminate a path forward, not just for him, but for everyone willing to witness it and believe in it.